All right, guys, this is part 4 of our read aloud, and we're taking off at Wednesday, April 10th, 1912, the RMS Titanic. So much has happened today that I scarcely know where to begin. The Titanic is, to put it bluntly, the most magical and astounding place in the world. Bigger, grander, and more exotic than I could possibly have predicted. She is awe-inspiring and yet comfortable. Right now, I am sitting in a deck chair on what they call the promenade. I was up on the boat deck for a while, but the wind grew so cold for me, so I moved down to the more enclosed promenade. Mrs. Carstairs is off in her cabin, having a rest before supper, and Florence is curled up on my lap, snoring. I guess I should start with this morning and our final hours at the Southwestern Hotel. I thought I would never be able to fall asleep, but I awoke to find sunshine filling my room. A livery man brought tea and toast right to my room without even asking, which pleased me a great deal. I feared that I could grow accustomed to this special treatment. I took another bath simply because the shiny white tub was there, and then put on one of my new dresses. Mrs. Carstairs has made it clear that she does not want to see me in any more hideous, hideous convent discards. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound pleasant, does it? And I suspect it is not worth the breath it would take to argue. Anyway, this dress is gold and yellow, made of material I cannot identify, but the cloth feels very soft. The fancy petticoat makes the skirt billow out amusingly. My new shoes seem slippery against the floor, so I put on my old dependable boots instead. The dress is long enough so that no one will ever be able to tell anyway. I brushed my hair, then pinned it back as well as I could, so that it would not fly about. In the trunk I even found a pair of white gloves, so I wore them too, just for amusement. When I appeared at Miss Carstairs' door, she squinted through her glasses, and then nodded in approval. Much better, she said, but do not neglect your hat. I assured her that I would not dream of doing so, and went back to get the plainer of the two. I dread having to wear the gaudy one, as I am sure it will look quite the imbecile. We had a most leisurely breakfast. I ordered a delicate sheared egg with sausage, kippers, and a jacket potato. At St. Abernathy's, eggs were always a special treat, and you would receive a soft-boiled one only at Christmas, Easter, and your birthday. Are eggs really special here today? We eat eggs a lot, don't we? Yeah, especially for breakfast. I do anyway. I was surprised that Mrs. Carstairs, like her husband, preferred coffee to tea, but that must be the way Americans do things. She did not seem to fancy kippers either. In both cases, I felt that it was a wretched mistake on her part. Florence enjoyed a small plate of chopped ham, and crusts from Mrs. Carstairs' toasts. Early on, I spilled a tiny bit of marmalade on my sleeve and quickly blotted it away with a damp napkin, hoping that no one would notice. Many of the other people in the hotel dining room also appeared to be Titanic passengers, as they looked eagerly in the direction of the docks, whenever the great steam whistles blasted away. There were even a few children who sat in their fine clothes, much less self-consciously than I did. The boat whistles had been blaring all morning, announcing to all the Southampton that it was sailing day. As the town was a bustling seaport, I suspected that they had heard these ship whistles on a regular basis and grew weary of them. After our meal, it was time to go upstairs and prepare for our leave-taking. Apparently, passengers from the boat train were already boarding the ship. Porters arrived with their wheel carts to take out our luggage, and Mrs. Carstairs handed out folded wads of blank notes with casual air. The porters and bellhops were elated to accept them. As we crossed the Canute Road and approached the quay, it became more difficult to navigate through the crowds. Trunks and bags of overstuffed boxes were piled everywhere, and I wondered how the porters could possibly keep track of all of them. People crowded every possible space, and it was hard to separate the passengers from the onlookers. "Oh, hey, Max," came to join us. Only various working men, with their confident movements and expressions of tense concentration, stood out to me. The side of the ship seemed to have openings all over the place, and gangways stretched out to meet them from the railroad platform and the quay itself. The gangways looked rather like wooden bridges with waist-high railings. Men and women in plain, sensible outfits were boarding on the lower decks, while the gangways above were packed with people arrayed in the grandest fashions. By virtue of clothing alone, this was not at all difficult to tell which passengers were steerage and which were first class. Presumably the second-class passengers were the ones boarding somewhere in the middle. I saw a thin girl in a kerchief and a gray wool who seemed to be watching me somehow envious farther down the quay. I realized then with a start that my appearance made her think that I was a young lady of privilege. The thought struck me funny, and I was tempted to raise my skirt and show her my worn old boots, but she was already gone, and I was following Miss Carstairs up a flight of stairs toward the first-class gangways. I had never seen such a crowd in my life, and I could not quite picture how many of us could fit inside the ship. Enough, I assumed, so that you might never see the same person twice. But I suppose some of the people were only here to see others off, and had only come down to stand nearby and vicariously enjoy the excitement of the day. Walking across the gangway, I had a moment's unease, wondering if I really wanted to get on such a gargantuan ship and float off to the middle of the ocean. Dry land seemed so much more familiar and safe. In truth, I had never ridden it in a dinghy. For that matter, I had never floated on a raft. "Please do not dawdle, Margie Jane," Miss Carstairs said sharply, as a rather handsome ship's officer waited to greet us at the end of the gangway. I nodded and quickened my pace. To my surprise, seen up close, the side of the ship was pieces of metal, welded and riveted together. I did not know what I had expected, not wood, obviously, but the bumpy appearance caught me off guard. I guess I thought it would be smooth and seamless, which only goes to show you how little I know about boats. I reached out to touch the metal, finding it, quite predictably, cold and solid. Nearby passengers looked disapprovingly at me, so I yanked my hand away. We stepped inside the ship and into a thickly carpeted hallway. I had not expected carpeting either. A uniformed man just inside the entry handed us a small nosegay of flowers from a large wicker basket next to him. No one had ever given me a flower before, so even though it was probably routine on occasions like this, I felt flattered. From there, we went to the purser's office. Mrs. Carstairs handed our tickets and other necessary paperwork to Chief Purser McElroy and made arrangements to come back later to deposit her valuables in the ship's safe. Once we were back in the corridor, still another smiling, dark-haired young man stepped forward. He was wearing a white uniform and introduced himself as our bedroom steward, Robert Merton. Our staterooms were down on C deck, and he would be escorting us there, and would be at our service throughout our voyage. Mrs. Carstairs told him that she had sailed the White Star Line many times before, and began to give him a long list of instructions about exactly how she wanted things done. He nodded solemnly at each request, and then smiled at me. "You would be Mrs. Carstairs' daughter?" he asked, as he led us through the maze of carpeted corridors. Miss Carstairs gasped, and I grinned. He might be the first, but he would probably not be the only person on the ship who would jump to that mistaken conclusion. "No, I am her staunch companion," I answered. "Yes, this is Margaret Jane Brady," Miss Carstairs said, recovering from her composure. "You may feel free to treat her as you treat me." Robert nodded very solemnly, although I could see amusement in his eyes. You would want to treat Florence just that much better, I said, indicating the dog in Mrs. Carstairs' arms. Robert nodded again, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That goes without saying, Miss Brady. So far I was quite taken by Robert. He looked to be in his late teens, and seemed to be one of the William seemed the sort to be one of William's mates. Mrs. Carstairs ignored the entire exchange, inquiring as to the whereabouts of the general safety of her baggage, and whether it would be unpacked for her, or if she would be required to do this herself, a concept she found disagreeable. I was so busy looking around that I missed Robert's answer. People were milling about, nearly surrounding us, either trying to find their cabins or exploring the ship and making admiring remarks. I noticed that I was not the only one who could not resist reaching out and touching things. Robert steered us expertly along to a set of 3 lifts, and we were crowded into the first one that opened. Every woman crammed inside seemed to be wearing a different scent. I found it a little difficult to breathe through the confusion of strong perfumes. We rode down one deck and then walked through another corridor. The walls were a pristine white and the floor still carpeted. It felt as though we were inside a hotel, like Claridge, rather than on a ship. Somehow I had imagined that a sailing vessel would be much less substantial. You will be right up here, Mrs. Carstairs, Robert said, pointing. Well, Miss Brady is just across the way. He opened her stateroom first, and I could see that our baggage had arrived ahead of us. There were several boxes of fresh flowers piled up on a low mahogany table near a settee, and Mrs. Carstairs immediately asked to have them arranged in a vase at first possible opportunity. She said proudly that most of them were probably from her dear Frederick, and he was not a thoughtful husband. Was he not a thoughtful husband? She also asked that a bowl of fresh water be brought for her Florence right away. Robert nodded and smiled and nodded some more. I waited outside in the corridor, watching other patient stewards ushering other demanding passengers to their cabins, each receiving bewildering litany of instructions and compliments. Come knock on my door as soon as you get settled, Mrs. Carstairs said to me. We will want to be up on the boat deck when we cast off. I nodded and followed Robert to my stateroom. He had an interesting accent, which I could not quite place. South London, maybe? Manchester? When I asked, he said he was a Liverpoolian, and other words from Liverpool. Just for fun, I responded with some Cockney, saying that me being a Londoner, and that practically made him a bleatin' fawner. But still in all, he seemed like a right steady grint who acted proper. He laughed and instinctively glanced at the direction of Miss Carstairs' door to see if she had overheard. She's not experienced this side of me yet, I said. He smiled very broadly. I know, I don't suppose she has, Miss Brady. My stateroom was smaller than Miss Carstairs', but still wonderful. Before leaving to tend to other passengers, Robert took a moment to show me where things were, from the wash basin to the bedside heater, to the button to push for immediate service, and even my lifebelt, which was resting nearly atop the wardrobe. I would be sharing a lavatory with someone's maid who had the cabin next to mine, and that was certainly not a hardship. He told me to be sure to call him if I needed any help or even just had a question. Then with a wink and a slight bow, he left. I stood in the middle of my cabin thinking about how lucky I was in my own beautiful room aboard the RMS Titanic, the finest ocean liner in the world, on my way to America. That leaves it to be the end. Next time. See you guys.